Before Dark Souls became the blueprint for punishing action RPGs, there were these forgotten PS1 games that were doing the exact same things decades earlier, and nobody was paying attention. These games had brutal difficulty, cryptic storytelling, stamina management, and that same feeling of dread when you walk into a new area not knowing what's going to kill you. If you think Dark Souls invented tough but fair combat, you need to see where it all actually started. Nightmare Creatures is basically Bloodborne on the PS1, but with way less budget and way more jank. The premise is absolutely metal because you're fighting through Victorian London that's been overrun by mutated monsters created by a mad scientist's experiments with occult rituals. You play as either a monk or a mystic, and the atmosphere is incredible with fog-covered streets, gothic architecture, and genuinely unsettling enemy designs that look like they crawled out of a nightmare. Every enemy encounter is dangerous, and you can't just button mash your way through. You have a light attack, a heavy attack, and a limited number of special moves that drain your adrenaline bar. Heavy attacks are slow and leave you vulnerable, but they deal massive damage and can stagger enemies, while light attacks are faster but weaker, creating this risk-reward decision with every swing. Here's where it gets intense. The adrenaline system is basically a timer that constantly drains, and if it hits 0, you start losing health automatically. The only way to refill it is by killing enemies or finding adrenaline items scattered around, forcing you to keep moving forward and stay aggressive instead of playing it safe. You can't just hide in a corner and wait for an opening. You have to engage enemies even when you're low on health, or you'll die anyway. The levels are designed like mazes with branching paths and dead ends, and there's no map or objective markers, so you're constantly exploring and hoping you're going the right way. Boss fights require pattern recognition and perfect timing because getting hit even a few times can kill you. The difficulty curve is steep from the very first level, making victories feel incredibly satisfying. Soul of the Samurai is a hidden gem that combines survival horror with samurai action, and it has the same oppressive atmosphere and punishing combat that would later define Dark Souls, plus the genius decision to let you play as two different characters with completely different playstyles. You can choose Kotaro, a samurai with a katana who fights enemies head-on, or Lin, a kunoichi who uses stealth and ninja tools to avoid combat. The game is set during the Sengoku period where demons called golems are invading a village, and you have to survive the night while figuring out who summoned them. The combat as Kotaro feels exactly like early Souls games with slow, deliberate sword swings requiring precise timing and spacing. Enemies can kill you in just a few hits if you're not careful. You have a guard button that blocks attacks, but drains your stamina, and you can perform charge-heavy attacks that deal massive damage but leave you vulnerable. Here's the genius part. The posture system lets you break an enemy's guard by attacking repeatedly, which staggers them and lets you land a critical hit. Similar to the system in Sekiro. Playing as Lin completely changes the game because you're much weaker in direct combat, so you have to use stealth to avoid enemies and set traps to take them out indirectly. You can throw kunai to distract guards, use smoke bombs to escape when spotted, and perform stealth kills on unaware enemies. The game has a time limit where you need to survive until dawn, and certain events happen at specific times, so you manage your time carefully and decide which areas to explore. The atmosphere is incredible with traditional Japanese horror elements like yokai, cursed shrines, and possessed villagers, and the pre-rendered backgrounds are beautifully detailed with candlelit temples, misty forests, and bloodstained courtyards. Multiple endings depend on your choices and which character you play as, and some endings are really dark. Kingsfield is literally the game that created the Souls formula because it was made by From Software in 1994, and everything that would later appear in Demon's Souls and Dark Souls started here. This is a first-person dungeon crawler where you explore a massive interconnected island filled with monsters. The combat is slow and methodical, with every sword swing requiring careful timing and stamina management. You hold the attack button to charge your weapon, and the longer you charge, the more damage you deal, but you're completely vulnerable while charging, so you have to find openings in enemy attack patterns. The stamina system is punishing because sprinting, attacking, and swinging your weapon all drain stamina, and if you run out, you're stuck moving in slow motion until it refills. The world design is classic Souls with interconnected areas that loop back on themselves, shortcuts that unlock to make travel easier, and secrets hidden everywhere. There's no map, no objective markers, and no quest log, just you wandering through dark caves, ancient ruins, and poisonous swamps trying to figure out where to go next. The game respects your intelligence by never telling you anything directly. You have to read item descriptions, talk to NPCs, and pay attention to environmental clues to understand the story. Enemies deal massive damage, and you start with basically no health or defense, forcing you to explore carefully and avoid fights you're not ready for. Magic is powerful, but requires finding spell scrolls hidden throughout the world, and casting spells drains your magic meter, which only refills when you use magic restoration items or rest at specific locations. The atmosphere is oppressive and lonely with minimal music and just the sound of your footsteps echoing through empty hallways. The game uses darkness as a gameplay mechanic where you need to equip a lantern or cast a light spell to see in certain areas. The interconnected world design means you can access areas in different orders, and some areas are clearly too hard for your current level, teaching you to recognize when to turn back. Baroque is a roguelike dungeon crawler, so weird and oppressive that it makes Dark Souls look cheerful by comparison. The world has been destroyed by an event called the Blaze, which twisted reality and turned people into monsters called grotesques. You play as an amnesiac wandering through a surreal wasteland, trying to reach the bottom of a tower called the Neuro Tower to purify the world. The game never explains anything clearly, instead burying the story in cryptic item descriptions and fragmented conversations with insane NPCs. Every time you die, you lose all your items and equipment and start over from the beginning, which is the core roguelike loop. Here's the genius part. Dying is actually how you progress the story. Each death reveals a new piece of information or unlocks a new conversation with an NPC, and you're supposed to die dozens of times to piece together what's actually happening. This feels exactly like how Dark Souls uses death as a narrative and mechanical tool. The combat is real-time and brutal, with a stamina system that drains when you attack, dodge, or run, and if you run out of stamina, you're defenseless until it refills. Enemies hit hard and have weird attack patterns that take multiple attempts to learn, and the random dungeon generation means you can never rely on memorizing layouts. You have to adapt constantly. The item system is deliberately confusing because items have hidden effects that aren't explained, and you have to experiment to figure out what they do. Some items curse you with negative effects, but provide powerful buffs, and you decide if the trade-off is worth it. The atmosphere is what really sells the Souls connection because the entire game feels like a nightmare with disturbing enemy designs, unsettling music, and environments that look like they're melting and shifting. The Neuro Tower gets darker and more twisted the deeper you go. The ending is intentionally ambiguous and requires you to complete specific conditions the game never tells you about.
Look forward to next time, goddammit!
Bushido Blade is one of the most unique fighting games ever made, and it shares DNA with Dark Souls in ways people don't talk about enough. It treats combat like actual sword fighting where one good hit can end the entire fight in seconds. There's no health bars, no time limits, and no rounds, just you and your opponent with katanas. The first person to land a clean hit usually wins. The game is set in a secret dojo where warriors train with traditional Japanese weapons, and you can choose from different weapon types like katanas, nodachi, rapiers, and hammers, each with completely different move sets and reach. The deliberate pacing and emphasis on spacing, timing, and reading your opponent's movements feels exactly like a Souls game. If you swing wildly, you'll get punished hard. Every attack has weight and commitment, and once you start an animation, you're locked in until it finishes. You have to think carefully about when to strike. The stance system lets you switch between high, middle, and low stances that change your attack angles and defensive options, and certain stances are better against specific weapons. Getting hit in the legs cripples your movement, forcing you to fight while crawling or limping, and getting hit in the arms makes you drop your weapon or weakens your attacks. Even after taking a crippling hit, you can still win if you're skilled enough. And some of the most intense moments come from dragging yourself across the ground, trying to land one final desperate strike. The story mode has you fighting through the dojo and escaping into the surrounding forest and bamboo groves, and the environments are fully explorable with no invisible walls. You can run away from fights and try to ambush your opponent from behind, or you can challenge them to an honorable duel and bow before engaging. Attacking while someone is bowing or striking a downed opponent breaks the code of Bushido and gives you a bad ending. It's about respect, discipline, and understanding that every fight could be your last. Tenshu proves stealth action could work in 3D while following the same philosophy that would later define Dark Souls, punishing you hard for mistakes, but giving you all the tools to succeed if you're smart and patient. You play as either Rikamaru or Ayame, two ninjas working for a lord in feudal Japan, and the missions send you into enemy territory to assassinate targets, rescue hostages, or steal documents. Instead of forcing you down a single path, the game gives you massive vertical levels where you can grappling hook onto rooftops, hide in shadows, or swim through rivers to avoid detection. Every level is like a puzzle where you study enemy patrol patterns and figure out the perfect route to take them all out without being seen. Getting spotted usually means fighting multiple guards at once, which is almost always a death sentence. The combat system is deliberately clunky and slow because you're not supposed to fight fair. You're supposed to be a ninja who strikes from the shadows and disappears. When you sneak up behind an enemy and press attack, you perform a stealth kill with a brutal animation that never gets old. The game ranks you at the end of each mission based on how many enemies you killed silently versus how many times you got spotted. The item system gives you tools like smoke bombs, caltrips, and poison rice that you place as traps or use to create distractions, and managing your limited supply adds another layer of strategy. There's no hand-holding with tutorials or objective markers telling you exactly where to go. The atmosphere is incredible with traditional Japanese music and levels set in moonlit villages, snowy mountains, and bamboo forests that feel alive and dangerous.
You took your time getting here.
Darkstone is basically Diablo on the PS1, but with a Dark Souls twist, combining action RPG combat with punishing difficulty and atmospheric dungeon crawling. You're an adventurer trying to collect magic crystals to stop an evil sorcerer, but the execution creates that same feeling of exploring a hostile world where death is always one mistake away. You choose from 4 different classes, including warrior, thief, wizard, or monk, each with completely different playstyles and abilities, and the game uses randomly generated dungeons, so every playthrough is different. The combat is real-time and fast-paced compared to other games on this list, but it's still brutally difficult because enemies swarm you in large groups and you manage your health, mana, and stamina carefully. The stamina system drains when you attack or run, and if it depletes completely, you move slowly and can't attack effectively. Here's what makes it punishing. When you die, you respawn back in town, but all your equipped items stay on your corpse, and you have to run back to where you died and retrieve your body before the timer runs out, or you lose everything permanently. This is kind of same as Souls games, but on the PS1, and it creates insane tension when you're trying to reach your corpse while fighting through the same enemies that killed you. The game has a day and night cycle where venturing out at night is much more dangerous because stronger monsters spawn and visibility is reduced. You decide whether to risk exploring at night for better loot or wait until morning. The dungeon design is claustrophobic with narrow corridors, dark rooms, and maze-like layouts where you can easily get lost or cornered. The progression system lets you level up stats and learn new spells and abilities, and you collect loot from enemies and chests, but good equipment is rare. The atmosphere is dark and medieval with Gothic architecture and creepy enemy designs, and the music is minimal and moody. Shadow Tower is from Soft's follow-up to King's Field, and it takes everything that game did and makes it even more punishing and atmospheric, basically creating a survival horror dungeon crawler that feels like Dark Souls meets Resident Evil. You're a warrior who falls into a massive underground tower filled with monsters, and you have to descend through multiple floors to reach the bottom and escape. The game is first-person like King's Field, but it adds survival elements that make every decision matter. The most punishing mechanic is weapon durability, where every weapon and piece of armor degrades with use and eventually breaks permanently. You can't rely on one powerful sword for the entire game. You have to constantly scavenge for new weapons and manage your inventory carefully. Do you use your best equipment now, or to save it for a harder fight later? The combat is slow and deadly with a stamina system that drains when you attack, and enemies hit like trucks, often killing you in just a few hits if you're not wearing heavy armor. The game uses limited healing items that are scarce and expensive, and there's no way to grind for resources because enemies don't respawn. Every encounter matters, and you have to decide whether fighting is worth the risk of losing health and equipment. The level design is oppressive and labyrinths with maze-like corridors, hidden traps, and dead ends that force you to backtrack constantly. Each floor of the tower has a distinct theme, from waterlogged ruins to lava-filled caves to ice caverns, and the game uses sound design brilliantly with enemy growls echoing in the distance and your footsteps changing based on the surface you're walking on. The story is told through environmental storytelling and item descriptions. You slowly piece together the history of the tower as you explore deeper. The game has multiple characters you can switch between who start in different parts of the tower with different equipment and stats. It creates tension through resource scarcity and the constant threat of permadeath for your equipment. Hell Knight is a Japanese horror game that never got enough attention in the West, and it does something Dark Souls would later perfect, making you feel completely helpless and forcing you to survive through careful observation and pattern memorization rather than power. The entire game takes place in a Tokyo subway system sealed off by the government because a monster called the Dark One is hunting people in the tunnels. You play as a normal person with zero combat abilities trying to escape. This is first person where you explore subway stations and tunnels while being chased by this unkillable creature that patrols the area. When it finds you, you can't fight it. You can only run and hide. The tension is insane because you hear its footsteps and breathing getting louder as it gets closer, and you decide whether to hide in a locker and wait for it to pass or sprint to the next area, hoping you don't hit a dead end. The game teaches you through repetition and death, forcing you to memorize the subway layout and learn the monster's behavior patterns so you can predict where it will be. You meet other survivors who can join you as companions, and they follow you around and help solve puzzles. But if the monster catches them, they die permanently and you lose their abilities. Multiple endings depend on which companions you save and which story paths you take, and the narrative is told through conversations with NPCs and environmental clues rather than cutscenes. The atmosphere is suffocating with dim lighting, narrow corridors, and the constant sound of trains in the distance. The save system is brutal because you can only save at phone booths scattered throughout the subway, and dying before reaching one means losing all progress since the last save. Vagrant Story is the most popular underrated PS1 RPG, and it's basically a proto-Dark Souls in every way that matters. The cryptic storytelling, oppressive atmosphere, and punishing combat system that requires you to actually understand the mechanics or get destroyed. You play as Ashley Riot, an elite agent sent to investigate a cult leader in the abandoned city of Leomond, which is this massive underground labyrinth filled with undead creatures, cultists, and demons. The game was directed by Yasumi Matsuno, who also made Final Fantasy Tactics, and the story is told through flashbacks, unreliable narrators, and cryptic dialogue that never spells anything out. You have to piece together what's happening by reading item descriptions and paying attention to environmental storytelling, which is literally the Dark Souls formula years before Dark Souls existed. The combat is real-time, but uses a targeting system where you aim at specific body parts on enemies, and different parts have different defense values and elemental resistances. You might fight a dragon and realize its head is weak to piercing damage, but its body is resistant, forcing you to adjust your strategy mid-fight. The weapon crafting system is incredibly deep because every weapon has affinities for different enemy types and damage types, and you combine weapons and materials to create custom gear specialized for specific situations. The chain system rewards aggressive play by letting you string attacks together for bonus damage, but if you get too greedy, your risk meter builds up and your accuracy drops. You have to balance offense with caution. The game has no shops and no towns. It's just you exploring this massive dungeon for the entire game. The difficulty is brutal because enemies hit hard and you can't just grind levels to become overpowered. You have to learn enemy patterns and exploit weaknesses. The art direction is gorgeous with detailed character models and a color palette that makes everything feel ancient and cursed.